you for coming in today. I know that, when it's lunchtime and midweek, it can be tricky. We are recording the session, so Joanna has been kind enough to say we can record, so that's brilliant. So today we're a small group, but we're recording so that we can show everyone else on LinkedIn afterwards. We're joined by Joanna Gaudoin, and she's going to talk to us today a little bit about the topic that she's an expert in. She's managing director of Inside Out Image Limited and author of Getting On, Making Work Work. I've got a copy. It's really, really good. Started reading it a couple of days ago, and getting some really great information from it. What I really like is that it's super easy to read. I like things that I can read easily without stressing me out too much, and but also that there's some really great resources attached in her chapters, which I'm sure she's going to talk about. So I won't go on too much. I'll pass over to Joanna, but she has said, if you've got questions, we can take them at the end. We've got a couple of questions we'd like to ask at the end. So she's quite flexible about answering those later on. So over to you.
Thanks a lot, Gretchen, and lovely to see you again. I know we met at a networking event, I think, where I was a speaker several years ago. So networking is something I talk about a lot in the book. So good that we've stayed in touch and still have our connection. So thanks very much to those of you joining live and to those of you who are going to listen later on, and to Gretchen for giving me this opportunity to appear on her podcast. And today I'm going to focus on my book that came out late last year and a particular part of it. Before I do that, I'm just going to give you a little short intro to myself, who I am and what I do, and then talk about the structure of the book before we deep dive a bit more into the first section of the book. So I'm Joanna Gaudoin. I've run Inside Out Image, my business for, oh, goodness me, 11 years, I think, this year, or is it 12? Something like that. I'm not quite doing the maths off the top of my head. And everything I do helps professionals navigate working life and progress their careers, and of course helps the companies, firms that they're part of to improve their performance. And I do all of this by working with people on their non-technical skills. So you've all got great technical skills. I'm sure you know your stuff, but it's the other skills you need, particularly as you become more senior, or even, dare I say, to become more senior. So things like managing others, being able to network well, develop business, manage upwards a lot more. You've got a lot more tasks to do, actually. The more senior you become, you've got a greater range of things you need to be managing. So I work with a lot of clients one-to-one. Usually those people have got a bit stuck in their career, either not progressing as they would want, they've perhaps not worked on those skills I've just listed enough, so I help them with that, or they want a new role. So lots of clients that I support in that way, and then I speak at events, and then in the middle is the seminars, training, workshops, masterclasses, and those take a range of different forms for different types of companies and firms, but lots of financial companies, law firms, actuarial consultancies, other consultancies, and banks as well. So I'm really fortunate. I have a nice varied life, and everything's different every day. I used to work in marketing consultancy, and I got a bit lost in those former careers and ended up working with a career transition coach for 6 months or so to help me to work out what to do next. And I had no idea I was going to run my own business at all. I genuinely didn't know what was next. And that's, yeah, I've ended up doing something very, very different now, but something I love. And one of my criteria was that no 2 days are the same. So I've definitely achieved that, which is really great for me and hopefully for my clients too. So I'm going to take you through this little schematic of my book that someone has drawn for me. You can see the lovely illustration of me bottom left, which I have to admit I'm taking some getting used to looking at it. I think it is a bit too like me, perhaps. That's maybe why I'm taking some time to acclimatise to it. So this sketch note takes you through the journey of the book, which will hopefully give us a good kick-off, but I'm then going to focus on, which is It All Starts With You at the top. And so I'm going to come back to explaining why section 1 is entitled It All Starts With You in a little while, and go into the detail of that. But section 2, you can see here, is entitled The Relationships You Need. And there are a ton of chapters in this section of the book around the relationships we do need internally and externally, How do we navigate difficult relationships? I do think there's quite an interesting challenge at the moment, because with hybrid working, I think a lot of people are hiding from challenges at work and having difficult conversations because we're only in the office maybe 2 or 3 days a week at most. It's easy to think, oh, I won't go in on Wednesday when that guy Bob, who I find quite difficult to work with, is there, for instance. So I think there's a very interesting piece around relationships and still really worth reading. So there's loads in that section around how to deal with difficult challenges, both day to day and bigger challenges in terms of pushing your career forwards. And then section 3 is professional scenarios. So this is looking very specific scenarios we all encounter at work. You can see some of them there. So meetings and presentations, whether that be virtually or in person, changing your role, whether that be in the company you're in or moving elsewhere, your day-to-day interactions, which people often massively underestimate. You know, it's the small actions each day, how we deal with other people, that fundamentally impacts the relationships we build, what they look like and how positive they are and how much they facilitate our working lives rather than perhaps being a barrier. An online presence on there as well, which I think has grown in importance since the pandemic. I don't know if any of you were in an organisation that had new people join whilst we were in the pandemic and locked away at home, but whereas we might normally have seen something about those people around the office or heard something, we're more reliant on things like LinkedIn to go and check them out, find out what have they done before, because that's our intel in advance of actually seeing them in a meeting or having a one-to-one, rather than just seeing them around the office. So I think that's become particularly important. So this section of the book is all about how to use these different professional scenarios as opportunities for raising visibility of yourself, getting people to know what work you're doing, and importantly, the skills you need to do them really, really well. So lots of very practical guidance in this section of the book. So just to go back to section 1, as when we talked about what we wanted me to focus on today, I gave some options, and it all starts with you, and why it does came out as favourite, together with taking some questions from you all. When I was thinking about the structure of the book, just to maybe slightly overshare a bit here, the process of writing a book, I have to confess, writing is not my favourite thing. Talking, speaking definitely is. So it took quite a lot of discipline for me to do the book, and I worked with a book coaching group to help motivate me to do it, because otherwise I knew I just wouldn't. I'd just focus on the daily work, doing what clients asked for, rather than this all-important book. And when we talked about planning the book, I at university, I don't know what any of you did if you went to uni, I never planned an essay, I just started writing. Probably not a great strategy, a lot of people would say, and certainly not one you could apply to a book. So what I did was, when I came to this, and the book coach was clearly saying that you can't just start writing a book, it'll be a complete mess if you do that, is I made a spreadsheet, which I think the rest of my book coaching group found quite amusing, but I use this for what is quite a creative process. And in that spreadsheet, every single row had a topic, a piece of guidance that I'd given, whether an individual client or in a group session. I literally went through all my materials, and each row had a different piece of guidance in it. And then what I did was I categorized those pieces of guidance by topics, and that brought together the chapters. But then there was the ordering of the chapters to do and to create sections. And when I reflected on this, I thought it had to start with getting us to think about ourselves, hence it being called It Starts With You. And the reason for that is, if I think about a lot of the challenges I help, particularly my individual clients, deal with, clearly quite in depth, often they come to me and they say, oh, I've got this really difficult team member, you know, can you help me sort them out? And that's quite interesting, because I can't really sort that person out. They're not my clients. All I can do is help the person who is my client to think about how they're engaging with them, how they're dealing with other people. So it does start with us, and we need to raise our self-awareness of how we are at work. It applies at home as well, how we come across to other people. Because fundamentally, when we meet other people, whether that be online like this or in person, they are perceiving something about us. might sound judgmental. You know, there are people who say, oh, I don't, you know, think anything about people until I get to know them. I just fundamentally don't think that's true. It's a human instinct, really comes back to friend or foe. You know, when you meet somebody, what do I think of them? How do I perceive them? And probably the most neutral you can get is, oh, I don't really know what to make of that person. But that still says something in itself. So it does start with us. Yeah, how are we coming across to others? And I'm not going to ask you, if you haven't met me before, I'm not going to ask you, but the minute you saw me today, you thought something, even if it wasn't a conscious thought. And so we do think that about one another. So hence you can see on the schematic here a couple of things on that far left under it starts with you. You know, how are you showing up at work, and thinking about your personal brand. And this is fundamentally about how would somebody describe you to someone who didn't know you. And a great way to think about this is, imagine you're leaving an in-person meeting, and on the way out of the room, you say goodbye to somebody who knows you well, who's talking to someone who doesn't know you so well. So I'll look forward to seeing you for that coffee this afternoon. The person that doesn't know you well, ask the other person, oh, so who's, you know, Joanna, what's she like then? What would be the 3 words, if you could categorize it that way, that you would like somebody to say about you? Aren't really about your technical abilities so much. They're more about what you're like to work with, how you engage with people. So that's the personal brand piece, and that's brought together by many things. I had somebody that was on a talk I ran last week, and she was very concerned that she doesn't come across very well. I won't say some of the things she said to me in the chat that she gets, the perception she gets. But she said, came back to me later, and she said, well, what can I do? I think my face is the problem. I said, well, honestly, I think there's nothing wrong with your face. She sent me a picture. I said, but your brand, the perception of you, your impact is made up of so many things. It's the totality of you. And yes, in an instant, someone might run away that you look a bit defensive because you're sat there with your arms crossed, you know, taking really basic body language cues. But you need to think about the totality of how you're coming across. So Gretchen just said to me a minute ago, she'd read in my book about how now what you look like in terms of clothing is far more of a judgment call. Yeah, we have to make far more of a decision about what's appropriate for our day, which is absolutely true, even versus when I started my business, probably 12 years ago, whenever it was. You know, that's changed a great deal. There are a lot more suits and ties, particularly probably in some of your industries around then, and that's changed. So appearance is one. Body language, of course, includes so many things. You could talk all day about the different elements of body language, you know, such as eye contact, gesturing, how you move, how you use your space. There's loads and loads of elements to that, as well as, of course, your voice. So not just what you're saying, but actually your tonality, the volume of your voice, the speed at which you speak. There is so much there that impacts other people. So it's quite hard to isolate. And certainly when I start working with clients, sometimes they come to me and they know they've got a particular issue. So I remember years ago, a guy who was going for partner at one of the top 10 accountancy practices. And it was his first go, so he didn't actually expect to get it. But he came to me thinking his body language was a bit off. You know, he was a bit twitchy, looked nervous. And yes, there was some of that, but there were some other things as well. So it's important to look at the whole picture of what we communicate. And you can see there's something referred to on the schematic of strength and warmth chart. And that is one of the resources in my book, because this is one theory about what sits behind first impression when we meet people. And we're judging them on their strength and warmth, even subconsciously. So the strength is all about the competency, particularly in a working scenario. So when somebody meets you and they know your job title, do they think you appear competent at what your job title says you should be competent at? And there's, of course, lots of things that impact that around body language, voice, even what you say. And then on the other spectrum, it's your warmth, which is how trustworthy, how friendly you come across. And lots of body language cues for that as well as your voice and language. So thinking about the balance of those, and generally you should have a balance of those two things, but which of course you'll vary for different scenarios. So the example I often give is, say you've got somebody working with you, for you, who's some performance issues. The first time you talk to them about those issues, you're probably going to be quite warm and friendly, you're trying to understand what's going wrong, how can I support you more. If you're having that conversation for the fourth time, the warmth probably diminishes. So what's quite interesting there, and this is in the resource that goes with the book, is for you to think about where you are typically on the balance of strength and warmth. And what changes that? Is it a certain situation? So if you hate presenting, that might change the situation. Is it certain people at work? But all of that impacts how you come across. So this first section of the book, there's a lot around perception. There are separate chapters on appearance, body language, and voice as well, to get you to think about those things. And then there is, it might sound a bit random, but there's a chapter in there on how you manage your time. And the reason that is there is because that's something you are in control of, and it impacts your time, but it also impacts how others perceive you, you know, whether you're spending time on the right things, particularly as you become more senior. And I always get clients who've been promoted to manage others are shocked at how much time managing others takes. And of course, managing others, you do start to step away from some of the actual doing. You know, your role is maybe more managing clients, managing your team, managing upwards. It's less about doing the actual core day-to-day work. But that is fundamental in terms of someone succeeding at their role and being perceived to succeed at their role as well. So that is the last chapter of that section. And I think it's pivotal that people think about these things, because that is how we are showing up in the workplace. And related, to link really to the second section of the book, you know, how we behave impacts how others respond to us. And where I get some of the best changes and outcomes for people are where we make a tweak to how they're behaving, interacting with somebody, trying to break what might be a negative pattern. And then it's only in time that that person will respond differently because you have changed your behavior. So whereas someone might expect you to respond to them in a certain way, so it's reactive as well as proactive, when you start to change that, that can change how the relationship goes forward. So it's called the self-fulfilling prophecy. And so it really says that we can't change anybody else's behavior except by changing our own, hence why it starts with you is the first section. So a good question to ask yourselves, and I have to ask myself this all the time as well, is what assumptions and beliefs do I have that are driving my behavior? And they might not necessarily be correct or true. And we have to be particularly careful about this in the workplace, because often we, a bit like a sponge, we take on other people's views, thoughts, beliefs, and then we act based on those. Or if you even think about someone comes across as they're trying to be kind, so maybe we're going to present a new way of doing something in a meeting in the afternoon, and our colleague says to us in the morning, "Oh, Joan, she's really not going to like what you have to say." Yeah, we can, depending on the relationship with the person who's telling us that, we might think they're being kind, we might think they're trying to cause an issue, but it could be neither of those. It could be they just don't have a great relationship with Joan, or they've heard something that's made them think this. But if we go off and act based on what Joan said to us, there's a real danger there. And this happens all the time in the workplace. We're reacting to things that might not be true, or they're massive assumptions. So we really do have to look at ourselves and think about what is driving our behavior. And of course, how do we look at things differently? It's so easy to get stuck in our ways of thinking and to limit ourselves as well. You know, I can't possibly do that. Really? Why not? You know, start thinking about what you can possibly do in terms of your capabilities. How can you change your behaviors? So hopefully that gives you a really good idea. I think I've probably just spoken on that for around 20 minutes looking at the time, on why it starts with you and how we do need to be self-aware. And I often say to people, it's building your self-awareness and realizing what we're good at, what we're less good at, what the situation really is, before we can go on and be educated about the things we need to work on, get the input, guidance we need, whether that's from someone like me, from my book, whether it's from articles somewhere else on the internet, maybe a colleague, a mentor, wherever that source of guidance and help might be, so that we can then adopt that, take it into the workplace and practice new things and working in different ways and gaining new skills. And the big recommendation with that is always try and work on just a couple of things at a time. if you try and work on too much, you won't make any long-term change and it'll be too overwhelming. So really trying to think about, what's the big list of things I need to work on? And those could be really micro things, body language things, or they could be bigger skill gaps that you think you've got. And then break that down. What's the importance of them? How can I prioritize? What are the actions I need to take? What's the help I need to make me move forward? And in the book, there's a lot of support with that. So just to talk about that a little bit more, as I've said, there are 3 sections. It's full of practical advice and guidance. I think Gretchen said just now, practical. I'm a really practical person. If people can't leave a session with me, individual or group, and take some action, I haven't had the impact I want to have. So it needs to be able to motivate you and also give you instructions of how you go and do something. There are lots of reflection points throughout the book as well. At the end of each chapter, there are case studies, of course, completely anonymized of my clients. They're relatively short, but to make key points. And Gretchen referred to the resources. There are 19 that you can download from my website, and they're signposted in the book. So most chapters, I think there are 13 chapters off the top of my head, have at least one resource. As you can see, some have multiple resources. And what I say to people is read the book through probably in its totality the first time, and then you decide where you need to focus. I'd be really surprised if any reader of my book worked on all 19 resources. That's probably going to take too much time and not be the best use of anybody's time. So I would be surprised by that. So if you read the book in totality, then you can decide which of those resources to go off and download, and you can either, they're editable actually online, so you could stick them on your computer if you don't want to print them, save some trees. You can use them either way, but the idea is to really help you take action on the things that you need to in the book. So hopefully that gives you a good broad spectrum of the book, as well as why it all starts with you is really the case. If you do want a copy of the book, I have some with me at home and I can sign them for you. And I've set up a specific link there. It's a different one from the one on my main web page because I've put a discount code in it for you. So I've put the price of £12.50 in, which is actually just below what Amazon are selling it for at the moment. It retails at £14.99 in other shops. So that link is there, and in a minute when you're asking me some questions, I can pop that in the chat for you if you do want a copy, and I'll put that in the post to you. Also as well, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I put a lot of content there as well, so if that's helpful to you, then please do. And my email address is there, as well as all over the internet in various places if you any questions. But I'd be delighted to take your questions now if you want to submit some, and I think Gretchen's got a couple for me as well.
Thanks, Joanna. Yeah, we had a couple of questions that I know that we talked about before, but before Jo does that, there is one bit I wouldn't mind just mentioning. So the first section of the book, as you talked about, it's mainly all about why it starts with you, and I think that, I mean, I know everybody on this call knows, we've talked about brand before, we've talked about, how you show up. I think that this is a great summary and really, as I say, an easier read than some of the other things that I've read around really considering why that's so important. I think you've done a great job on reflecting about it being so important now, almost more important, and difficult to navigate that in a hybrid environment, post-pandemic, when you get invites that are when you get invites that are like when you get invites that are business casual. Hate that. I'm not very good at that at all. It's either casual or business dress for me, so I really struggle with that. So I think that section is really important. The other section that I have really enjoyed getting to look at is the section around great foundations of great relationships and how people are all different. And I really I think everyone's done personality tests, analytics around different approaches, and we know that there are these quadrant things of where your red might be opposite of blue, and how you might have to communicate with one another. And I've done a lot of that, and I think most people will be familiar with the concept. But you introduced this thing weirdly by someone called Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies. I've never heard of that before, and I'd like you just quickly introduce that a little bit and just talk about these 4 types of people, because that really resonates with someone in one of the people in my team, and how I struggle to sometimes communicate effectively with that person.
Yeah, I love this framework, and she's the only other person I've ever heard of that's called Gretchen, apart from you, Gretchen. Very memorable. She calls this the 4 tendencies quiz. I actually got to know Gretchen Rubin because I read her book, The Happiness Project, which I don't know if any of you have read. I would say it's not really a workbook, it's more of a outside of workbook, but she, in that book, just briefly to say about that, she spends a year, and each month she tackles something different. She does something differently in her life to see if it makes her happier. So one thing that really stands out in my mind, probably because it's something that's important to me to do, is she makes sure she sends birthday cards to her friends that arrive on time. 1 month, that is one small thing she does. And what she's testing is it small things make a difference? Is it big things? What type of things? And it's a really interesting journey in that book. But a lot of Gretchen's work is around habits, actually, from what she talks about. I think she's got a podcast as well. She's got several books. I've only read The Happiness Project and the one you mentioned, The 4 Tendencies. And what she says in The 4 Tendencies is fundamentally there are 2 types of expectation. So there's an outer expectation, so expectations that come from other people. So Gretchen expecting me to turn up today on time, that I'm going to speak on this podcast. An inner expectation being something I set myself and other people probably don't care that much about. So that might be going on a diet, going to the gym, that sort of usual stuff that we just tell ourselves we want to do. What she says in the quiz, and I do think quiz is a bit of a unkind name she's given it, actually, because I'm not saying it's the most in-depth psychologically researched piece I've ever read, but I think it's more valuable than a quiz. Quiz to me says it's just a bit of fun. I actually think it has more weight than that. So what she says in this is when you do the quiz, which I can't remember how many questions it is, it's not very many, it's not very long, you come out as one of 4 profiles, and unlike some of the others, you very definitely fit into one. It's not a case of you can be a bit of 2. So what those profiles are, you've probably guessed it, as you either meet inner expectations, but not outer expectations well. The other way round, you meet both, or you meet neither. And I found this really fascinating because I think it helps us understand ourselves, as well as you just said, Gretchen, understanding people we work with. So I don't mind confessing I am an obliger. So that means I meet outer expectations. I don't meet my inner ones very readily. Hence why I needed to join a book coaching group to actually write a book, because I knew I just wouldn't. Because yes, I'd had people say, oh, have you got a book? It'd be good if you wrote a book. But no one was hammering on my door each day, where's your book? So I needed that accountability. So if you're like me and an obliger, you've got something you want to achieve, you need to tell other people. So if I want to lose weight or I want to commit to a new bit of exercise, I always tell somebody else. And even though they might not particularly care, if I know I'm going to check in with them, it makes me care and do it. So that's one type. The opposite of that would be a questioner. And I think this is a particularly interesting profile if you work with anybody or you are one yourself. So if you've got somebody that continually, if you manage them and you're asking them to do things, they ask you questions, almost trying to get you to justify why they need to do whatever it is. Now, that can be a situation in the relationship that they don't really like you, they want to just be challenging and difficult. It absolutely can be that. But it could be they're just a questioner, which means that to get something done, they need to really see the value in it and make it an inner expectation, because they're not driven by outer. So that's fascinating, and I've had that with quite a few clients over the years, and it really helps people because they step away from feeling judged, challenged all the time. Just realize that's just what this person's like, and actually I can preempt that. And when I'm asking them to do something, I'm, rather than waiting for the deluge of questions as to why they should do it, explain more fully why, and that's more helpful and productive. And then of course you've got the people both and neither. Now, an upholder is interesting. I just get the feeling from reading this myself, an upholder is going to be really busy, so running around trying to meet all sorts of expectations all the time. And the rebel, and I'm married to a rebel, so it's quite challenging, I would say, is someone that doesn't meet either. And that's quite a complex one. That's about identity and getting them to do things that are in line with who they are as a person rather than any particular expectations. And it is quite challenging to get a rebel to commit. So this is a continual dialogue I have with my husband about, is he going to join a gym? Is he going to do this? It's sort of, I still don't really get it, despite all my work, because I'm just so far off being a rebel. But it's really interesting to understand.
And it's something different from what I've heard of before in this context. It really resonated with me. So I'm going to make sure I read a bit more and download, do the quiz. I've got a couple of
find out what you are.
Kate saying that she's got a rebel, in her relationship as well. And I also had a question from Kathy while you were talking. She asked to start off with, what is your infographic sketch called? Is it got a name? But also, as a person she calls herself as without boundaries and lack of self-awareness and possibly ADHD, how does she manage her chatty, curious and connecting sort of desires with maybe people who slightly mismatch from that? And I think that what you're going to say is about this warmth and strength thing that you mentioned earlier, but and then a couple of people saying, can we just pop that link in because we can't click on your
let me do that.
PowerPoint. So do that now so that
let me do that so I don't forget. Let me just go and get that for you. The sketch note, that's an easy one to answer. Essentially, the company who published my book, they work with the lady who does these sketch notes for a lot of the books. And that's what it's called, actually, is a sketch note. I'd never really heard of them before. And I think she doesn't just do them for books, she does them for all sorts of things. And the idea is to try and convey, something that's quite a big, long-winded concept easily. And we had quite a bit of backwards and forwards to get to the right outcome.
No, I really like it. I think, it's a great way, and I think everyone else would agree, to sort of, especially rather than explaining in lots of different slides, it was a really good infographic. So
she's called Sam Warburton. I'm connected to her on LinkedIn, so if you think you've got something, she, as I say, I don't think she just does books, so I think she'd be useful for other things. So feel free to, if you can't find her details, contact me and I can give them to you.
Wow. So Kathy's question about her oversharing or chatty, curious self.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kathy, because I, as far as I'm aware, I don't have ADHD. I've never been through any sorts of testing or anything. But I do understand your challenge because I'm very extrovert. I'm very chatty. I do have a tendency to overshare. So I have to almost really consider, right, what sort of person am I engaging with? Is this going to be appropriate? I don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. So I had a client a while ago and he had quite a few conditions and he was a real oversharer, in particular about all the conditions he had. And so we spent quite a bit of time talking about, well, how could that make somebody feel? Doesn't mean you shouldn't be open, but the minute you meet somebody, just sharing all of that can make people feel a bit overwhelmed and they don't quite know what the expectation is about response because they don't know you very well. So I think what I'd say, don't not be yourself. You need to. That's a whole part of personal brand. But it's just thinking about what version of yourself. So for instance, if I can see someone's a bit quieter than me, their tone of voice is quieter, they maybe don't move quite so quickly, I just dial myself back a very little bit. And I'm not saying it's the easiest thing, but it's an important thing because we all need to adapt to be with one another. And I'm sure other people have to do the other way. They have to inject a bit more energy into themselves if they're with somebody that's a bit more chatty and energetic like us. So I hope that's not too vague an answer for you, but I think it's just reminding yourself to take a few moments to think, okay, how do I engage with this person? I mean, for instance, my poor husband, he's getting lots of mentions today. He's quite an introvert and he's a lot more thoughtful and quieter than I am. And especially in the morning, I'm a morning person, he's not. You can see how different we are here. Sometimes he'll say to me, whoa, too loud. Can you speak quieter? And it's just because I'm excited about the day, yay, let's get going, and he's just not there yet. So, even me, I have to continually remind myself to think about what's going to be the right context for this person. And I think we have to do that in all sorts of things, our voice, our body language, our gestures, how we dress even. So I'm going into London tomorrow, and I'm thinking, oh, normally when I go into London, I'm quite formally dressed because of the types of companies I go to. But tomorrow I'm like, actually, no, that's not appropriate. If I dress very formally for a certain meeting I've got tomorrow, I'll be intimidating to that person. So actually, I need to do a bit differently tomorrow. So it's just thinking about the context and the individuals we're meeting.
Fab, thank you. Jo, if you thought, there was a couple of predetermined questions, but I'm not sure, we've covered so much. Is there anything that's come up for you as well? Because I know you're off mute.
Yeah, I think one that really we wanted to know a bit more about is, what is the most satisfying client outcome that you've had, Joanna?
Yeah, I know we talked about this one, and it is hard because I've had loads. There's one particular client I have in mind though, actually. She was an investment manager, and she was in a really difficult situation. She had been working in this team, and I'll have to do the short version of this, and her manager had been off sick for a lot of the year, and her manager was also quite good friends with some of the other people in the team, not so much her. And then when the manager eventually left for whatever reason, my client got promoted, so she was then managing these people. So that was really difficult because lots of them were really upset that she was the one that got promoted. I think the ex-manager was probably talking in their ear behind. The team had also got very used to talking to their boss's boss. So she had quite a challenge to develop her own leadership style, to manage the more senior person to say, well, now I'm obviously in this role, we need to work out, when do you answer them directly? When do you push them over to me? She also was the one who had a questioner in her team, or one of the ones who had a questioner in her team. We had to work that out because in the context of all of that, she felt like she was being challenged the whole time. So that was a really satisfying client to work with, because over time we developed her style. We worked on the individual relationships that she had with, I think, the 3 or 4 people in her team. And now she's gone on, she actually lives in the same town as me, so we sometimes meet up for a drink now and then now. She's got a much bigger team. She's recruited some of those people who she thought would leave have stayed, and she's doing really well. I think she's actually been promoted again. So that sort of outcome for me, where people really feel that not only have they progressed in their career running a bigger team, promoted, but also their day-to-day working life is just better because those relationships are better. It doesn't feel uncomfortable, there's backbiting or nasty behaviours. So that's a rewarding one. And probably one other quick one to say, just because I had an email last week and I was really delighted, is I worked with a lady during the pandemic. She was a high-end EA, I think, EAPA, and I can't remember why she was out of work, but she was, and she was in her 70s. I was so impressed. I think it was literally mid-70s. She's like, I want a new job. I was like, seriously, you don't want to retire? No, don't want to retire, I want to get on with it. I thought, wow, if I've got your energy in 30 plus years, I'll be really happy. She was amazing. And so she lost some confidence. So we worked on her CV, worked on her LinkedIn. I helped her with interview practice, I think. And then last week, I just sent her an email. I said, sorry, not been in touch for a while. How are you doing? What's going on? She was like, well, it's as you thought. I'm back at X company, which was one of the ones she'd worked with before. Absolutely loving it. The people are great. The work's really challenging. This is a woman who's about 75. And thank you for giving my confidence back. And I didn't give her her confidence. I actually got her own confidence back by the work. She worked with me, but she took action. She worked on different things we talked about. And that was amazingly satisfying to see that sort of outcome, a turnaround.
Oh, wow.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joanna. It's been really good. I know that everyone on the call's gotten a lot from it, and I know everyone watching it afterwards will as well. So, and yeah, the sections that I've read have already piqued my interest. So that'll be my thing that will be read now. So, and I'm going to go and take that quiz, which I can find online.
Yeah, let me know.
Yeah, find out which one I am, even though I think I
Yeah.
know where I am.
Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it?
we do. Yeah.
So
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for those that have come along, and as always to Jo and Claire for their help with the FFEM group, and keep an eye on the LinkedIn group so you can find out what's next. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
afternoon.
Joanna. Take care.
Thanks, Joanna.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.